Welcome, listener. This is Sebastian Nothwell, here to introduce an abridged version of the 6th chapter of my gay Victorian romance, Mr. Warren's Profession, narrated by Gary Furlong. Enjoy!
Chapter 6. Lindsey's seductive smile fell away into an expression of terror. He snatched his hand back as if Aubrey had burned him. Yes, of course," he stammered. "Please, forget I said anything." He shot up from the desk, upsetting the ink bottle. Grabbing for it earned him a splash of ink between his left thumb and forefinger. Aubrey, wary of his resolve in the face of physical contact, kept clear of Lindsey's flailing. I should go," Lindsey continued as he backed away toward the door. "I've an appointment and best not trouble you any further. Good evening, Mr. Warren." He gave a stiff nod and fled. His exit left the door in motion behind him, swinging between open and shut. It stopped a hand's breadth shy of closed. Aubrey stared at where Lindsey had disappeared. Without Lindsey's hand, his thigh felt cold. This chill spread throughout the office. The empty space loomed larger than ever before. Aubrey's breath seemed to echo in it. He wrenched his gaze away from the door, rearranged the papers Lindsey had scattered in his flight, and returned to his bookkeeping. After the 4th elementary error, he realised his current temper was ill-suited for it and stopped. It wouldn't do to lose his job over something so trivial. It then occurred to him that he may have lost his job already. Aubrey stared at his ledger, his mind elsewhere. With his advances rebuked, Lindsey had no further reason to keep Aubrey in his employ, and would no doubt sack him tomorrow. Aubrey's stomach growled as if to remind him of the hungry times ahead. The abdominal pangs came alongside an ache in his chest, with no physical cause Aubrey could discern. Able to do no more work that night, and thoroughly ashamed of himself for it, he prepared to leave. As he retrieved his coat and hat from their respective pegs, he realised Lindsey had left his own hat behind. Aubrey's brain struggled for a solution. The hat needed to be returned to its owner. A gentleman would return it in person, an impossible task for one so vulgar as Aubrey. Perhaps he could use an intermediary. As he pondered his predicament, it dawned on him he'd spent the last few minutes stroking the smooth silk of the hat's brim. He jerked his finger away and brushed them off on his trousers. The hat remained on the hook, taunting him. Aubrey cast a helpless gaze upon it. Surely a man so wealthy as Lindsey wouldn't miss one hat. Aubrey chastised himself for the thought as soon as it occurred, but it persisted nonetheless. Besides, he didn't intend to steal the hat. Just put it away for a while, until he knew what to do about it. That would be enough for now. He glanced into the hole, determined it contained no one, then whipped the hat off the hook, crossed the room, flung open the bottom right drawer of his desk, and after a moment's hesitation, gently laid the hat inside with a few sheets of paper balanced atop it. It was a poor disguise and would fool nobody, but for now it was the best he could do. Aubrey resolved to think no more on it, nor on Lindsey's proposal. He'd made the right decision. He told himself so as he put on his own hat and coat and walked home from the mill. He told himself again as he choked down his tinned supper, tasting none of it. As he tried to unbutton the shirt he'd already removed and ended up jabbing his fingertips stupidly at his bare chest. As he crawled into bed and shivered beneath a threadbare blanket, powerless to keep the night's frost from seeping into his skin. As he stared up into the darkness, trying to will himself to sleep. As he twitched awake after dreaming of Lindsey naked and writhing on top of him, lying curled beside him, twining his arms around him. He told himself over and again he'd made the right decision. He'd insisted upon the point even as he woke late, nicked himself twice shaving, missed breakfast, and barely made it into the office before the bell tolled for first shift, all the while pushing the spectre of Lindsey from his mind. Or trying to. It proved difficult to banish, particularly when Aubrey had to work at the very desk with Lindsey's hat secreted away inside it. By second shift, Aubrey had added the same column of figures thrice over and found a different sum each time. That night sleep eluded him. His mind raced, engineering formulae replaced by the repeating recollection of his encounter with Lindsey the previous evening. Lindsey, with his regal carriage and noble ancestry, who thought nothing of tossing social protocol aside to meet Aubrey where he stood. Lindsey, with golden hair and a smile made of sunshine. Lindsey, with his deep blue eyes focused on Aubrey's face, and his hand on Aubrey's thigh. The memory of his warm, firm touch left Aubrey's skin afire in its wake. The next morning dawned dim and dull. Aubrey woke late again, full of melancholy longing. He sat up and regarded his garret by Manchester's cold, grey excuse for sunlight. From the bare floor to the peeling yellow wallpaper to the low slope of the ceiling beams, all spoke of poverty and despair. This, then, was what Aubrey deprived himself of every joy to preserve. The thought nearly drove him back to bed, but he refused to succumb. He pushed through the motions of preparing for work. While his body obeyed, his mind continued to wander. So what if Aubrey wanted Lindsey? Aubrey was used to never getting what he wanted. And so what if Lindsey wanted Aubrey in return? As a man of means, Lindsey could have whatever he wanted whenever he pleased. He'd probably already moved on to the next easy conquest. He would forget Aubrey within the week. Aubrey resolved to forget Lindsey first. But as much as he disliked the idea of being forgotten, he found he despised the prospect of forgetting Lindsey even more. Regardless of his emotional turmoil, Aubrey couldn't take Lindsey up on his offer. Such a path led to scandal, strife, and self-delusion. But he couldn't keep on as he was either. Twice now he'd tied his bootlaces in accidental slipknots. Hellfire and damnation, at this rate Smith would arrive at the office before him. Aubrey, ready to pull his hair out in frustration, racked his brain for a solution. He needed a third option, something between throwing himself upon Lindsey's mercy and tossing Lindsey out of his life forever. Perhaps if he accepted Lindsey's offer just once, indulged himself just enough to take the edge off his unnatural impulses, perhaps then he could return to his accustomed equilibrium. Aubrey tied a proper knot in his laces and stood up, squaring his narrow shoulders. Very well. He would accept. "You're quite the talented sulk," said Rowena over breakfast. She and Lindsey arrived late to the meal. Rowena had stayed out at a dinner party with Lady Pelham until the small hours of the morning. Lindsey had spent the night going over every syllable spoken, every gesture made in the course of his acquaintance with Aubrey, pulling his memories apart to find the point where it had all gone wrong. Consequently, neither sibling was awake when their father rose at dawn to consult the elder Miller at his bank. Now, at 11:30, Rowena and Lindsey faced only each other. Lindsey scowled at his eggs. He didn't consider Rowena's barb worth the trouble of a reply. Nothing seemed worth the trouble anymore. Getting dressed felt like an exercise in futility. Charles had managed to coax him into a fashionable outfit, but Lindsey still couldn't see the point. He had no one to impress. Certainly not Aubrey, who wasn't looking at him now, and had never looked at him the way Lindsey wished he would. The memory of Aubrey's dark wool suit came to the forefront of Lindsey's mind, with no effort whatsoever. Yet Lindsey couldn't recall what Charles had clothed him in not an hour previous. He had no idea whether he wore the periwinkle paisley waistcoat or the robin's egg blue. He considered tipping his gaze down his front to check, then remembered he didn't care, and huffed in disgust. He was more than disgusted. He was enraged. Not at Aubrey, of course. Never Aubrey. The idea was inconceivable. No. Lindsey reserved all his anger for himself. Only a fool would have pursued Aubrey with such relentless passion. Lindsey had probably frightened the poor man. To match the stain his folly left on his pride, a corporeal stain from Aubrey's inkwell remained on his left hand. He'd half a mind to tattoo it in place, as a permanent reminder not to transgress again. "Has Mr. Holmes failed to solve a case?" Lindsey looked up from his hand to find Rowena smirking at him. Were he not a gentleman, he might have thrown a napkin in her face. He settled for glowering at her from across the table. She smiled wider. "Nothing else could cause you so much grief," she continued. "Is it a robbery? Murder? Blackmail?" Lindsey crushed his napkin in his unstained fist, dropped it into his runny eggs, stood from the table, and strode out of the room. "Lindsey!" He quickened his steps down the hall, determined to ignore his sister's cries. Just a few 100 yards more to the stairs, and he could climb up to spend the rest of his life moping behind the locked doors of his suite. "Lindsey Marie Althorp, will you stop?" Unfortunately for his plans, Rowena outpaced him despite the handicap of skirts. He could have run for it, but his mood wasn't dark enough to blind him to the indignity of such a scene. As such, he allowed Rowena to catch his elbow and whirl him around to face her. "What is the matter with you?" she demanded. Lindsey fixed his gaze on the ceiling as he contrived to put his tempestuous emotions into words. "I've offended my clerk." Rowena remained silent, which forced Lindsey to look down to see her reaction. This vexed him. It vexed him double to discover she had one hand clamped over her mouth as the corners of her eyes pinched with restrained laughter. He wrenched his arm out of her delicate grip and marched off again. "Lindsey, wait!" she called, her voice bubbling with mirth. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. Your apologies would ring more sincere if you could refrain from giggling." Lindsey spun to a halt to fix her with his fiercest glare. She ignored it. "Will you join me in the morning room for reconciliation?" she said. "I do so hate quarrelling in the hall." Upon reflection, Lindsey thought her suggestion prudent and followed her there. "Now," she said once the doors had shut, and they stood together in an otherwise empty chamber. "What's this about your clerk?" "I believe I've spoken to you of Mr. Warren before." "Often and at length, yes." "Then permit me to bore you again." She inclined her head in a polite bow. He launched into a summary of his recent activity, acquiring the factory, meeting Aubrey, attempting to deepen their bond beyond what typically existed between employer and employee. Lindsey thought Rowena might do more than quirk an eyebrow at that last point, but she seemed far less surprised than he himself had felt at the discovery of his peculiar proclivities. Undaunted, he pressed on, culminating in a stuttered description of his final conversation with Aubrey. Rowena remained silent for a minute or so, after Lindsey concluded his tragic tale, deep in thought, with one hand held in a fist under her chin. "What were his exact words?" she asked. Lindsey blushed to repeat them, but did so regardless. "I am not entirely comfortable with the position of your hand," she echoed. A small frown creased her brow. "I suppose we must take him at his word. There's nothing else for it but time. You'll forget him eventually." "Forget Aubrey?" Rowena's left eyebrow reached new heights. Lindsey belatedly realized his error. "He's Aubrey now, is he?" said Rowena. Lindsey said nothing. Rowena tipped her head forward to pinch the bridge of her nose between two slender fingers. "While I dread the answer," she said, her tone grim, "I must assume you are Lindsey to him?" "Until yesterday." Rowena sighed and fixed her brother with a hard look. "Forget him. Don't sack him. I could never." Rowena continued as if she hadn't heard him. "It's already scandalous. Sacking him now would only set tongues wagging. He remains employed. You never set foot in the factory again. No, that's even more suspicious. Go on as though none of it ever happened. Don't speak to him unless absolutely necessary, which given the disparity between your respective stations, should be not at all. Throw yourself into theatre and have an affair with an actor, or brood into your novels, I care not, but forget him, and for God's sake, be discreet. Rowena! She cut him off. Do you understand what's at stake? It might not be a capital offence any longer, but you're hardly suited for prison. Lindsey jerked back, stunned. What are you implying? You must know whatever you desired between yourself and Mr. Warren is illegal. Yes, but Aubrey would never— Mr. Warren, said Rowena, enunciating the name with ferocity, is an unknown quantity. I cannot assume what he may or may not do. Why couldn't you fall for any of the dozens of grooms I threw into your path? The grooms you— Lindsey blinked. What? Rowena gave him a disappointed look. Surely you don't imagine I hired only the handsomest and most discreet young men for my own sake? Didn't you? Rowena let her face fall forward into her pretty palms, muffling her voice. Oh, Lindsey, you perfect idiot. Lindsey struggled to maintain his composure. If you're suggesting Aubrey could be replaced by any random gentleman you chose for me, you are quite mistaken. It hardly matters now. Rowena lifted her head and fixed him with an expression of cool composure. He has rejected your suit. Accept his decision with grace. Forget him and move on as you see fit. Should you seek to vent your frustrations, I can suggest several accommodating avenues. No, thank you, Lindsey replied curtly. Then the matter is closed. Good day, brother. She swept out of the room without waiting for his reply. Lindsey wished she'd left him in the library. There he might have found some distraction from his misery. Instead, he stood staring into space for a few minutes, then sat chin in hand in an understuffed armchair, and stared at the wall for many minutes more. He wasn't brooding, no matter what Rowena would say if she'd stayed to watch him. Sir? Lindsey whipped his head around to the doorway where Charles waited. Yes. Telegram for you, sir. Lindsey took it and dismissed him with a nod. After Charles had gone, he opened it. Mr. Althorp, Warren, please come to Mill at 9. Lindsey frowned at it. Certain he'd misread. Aubrey wanted to see him? Impossible. He'd made his opinion of Lindsey very clear at their last meeting. Perhaps something had gone wrong at the mill, though in that case the telegram would have come from Mr. Jennings. If it wasn't an invitation for a liaison, nor notice of an emergency, only one possibility remained. Blackmail. Lindsey's heart plummeted to the pit of his stomach. He supposed Aubrey's presumption should enrage him, but all he could muster was profound disappointment. He'd thought better of Aubrey. Just yesterday he'd have given him anything he desired. And he still would. Good sense be damned. Aubrey spent the day in dread. Smith left the office at the unusually late hour of 4. Mr. Jennings likewise stayed late, departing at 9:15. Aubrey's heart stuttered in his throat as he watched Mr. Jennings gather up his articles. He waited in dread for Mr. Jennings to stop at the door and demand Aubrey leave with him. Or worse yet, encounter Lindsey on his way out. But neither occurred. Mr. Jennings sighed and shook his head at the sight of Aubrey bent over 3 ledgers, and left without further comment. Part of Aubrey's anxiety left with him. The rest, fear of his telegram's interception by third parties, fear of Lindsey arriving with the police to arrest Aubrey for indecent solicitation, remained to prevent him from accomplishing anything in the quarter hour between Mr. Jennings's departure and Lindsey's earliest expected arrival. He endeavoured regardless. The sun had set hours ago. Aubrey almost forgot what light was. Then, at 10 past, Lindsey appeared on the threshold and reminded him. Mr. Warren, he gasped, breathless, as if he'd run all the way from London. You wished to see me? For once he wasn't smiling. Aubrey suppressed a surge of pity. "Mr. Althorp," he said. He'd risen from his desk the instant Lindsey arrived. Now he wavered, uncertain if he should approach him, or if he had any right to. He rapped his knuckles against a ledger. "Please, come in." Lindsey hesitated, then stepped into the office, his fingers clenched tight around the brim of his hat. Aubrey's pity won out. He abandoned the shelter of the desk and came forward to stand within arm's reach of Lindsey. "Regarding the subject of your hand on my thigh..." Lindsey's eyes flew wide. Aubrey realised his opening could be interpreted as a threat, and rushed to conclude his proposal. "I've given it some thought," he said, stumbling over syllables in his haste, "and I find myself far more amicable towards the suggestion than my previous answer may have led you to believe." Lindsey stared at him. Aubrey feared he'd overstepped. But then a slow smile crept across Lindsey's features. "Then," said Lindsey, "might I make another attempt?" He ended his inquiry by biting his lip. The sight stole Aubrey's breath. The best he could manage in reply was a nod. With timidity Aubrey found painful to witness, Lindsey lifted his hand to Aubrey's cheek. His fingertips brushed against Aubrey's jaw, their touch even softer than Aubrey had imagined. Lindsey halved the distance between them, then shut his eyes, tilted his head, and leaned in to close the final breach. Lightning seemed to strike the office as Lindsey's kiss made contact. Aubrey fought to stay upright despite the shock. The kiss remained chaste until Aubrey took Lindsey's lower lip between his own, drawing a gasp of delighted discovery from Lindsey's throat. Aubrey relished the sound. He cupped the back of Lindsey's head, pulling him in, determined to wring more pleasure from him. He got his wish soon enough. He and Lindsey entangling like youths in the throes of a newfound passion. The force of Lindsey's affections pushed Aubrey back against the desk. Aubrey responded in kind, his hands slipping under Lindsey's jacket and shoving it off his shoulders. The sight of Lindsey's upper arms in nothing more than shirt sleeves made him want to tear the jacket in twain, desperate to feel the warm, solid flesh beneath. Over those same magnificent shoulders, Aubrey could see the office door. It hung open a crack. All passion fled in the face of his horror. "Stop!" he hissed, shoving Lindsey's sternum with both palms. He'd expected to have to fight further to escape Lindsey's amorous clutches, but to his astonishment, Lindsey fell back the instant the command left his lips, looking confused and a little hurt, but not angry. Aubrey had no time to soothe his hurts or feel relief at the absence of rage. All his perception narrowed on the crack and the hallway beyond. He listened for any sign of possible witnesses. Hearing nothing, he stepped away from Lindsey, despite the cacophonous protests of his own fervid desire, to the door. He pushed it further open and peered up and down the corridor. It remained dark, silent, empty. No noise but the pounding of his panicked heart. He shut the door with a soft click. "This cannot continue," he said. An indignant sound of protest came from behind him. He turned to find the same look of confusion on Lindsey's face, though his hurt seemed to have progressed to anguish. "Here, I mean," Aubrey corrected himself as he hurried back to Lindsey's side, taking one of those magnificent arms in his grip. His mind went momentarily blank as he felt the strong sinew beneath the fine linen. Then he shook his head clear and continued. "Here and now. Impossible, but somewhere more private," Lindsey finished, a hopeful smile returning to his handsome features. "Yes," Aubrey agreed. Though rack his brains as he might, he couldn't think of anywhere they could go. The local hotels couldn't be trusted. His own lodgings shamed him. "Tomorrow?" said Lindsey, apparently untroubled by Aubrey's conundrum. "It's Saturday. You won't have work, will you?" "A half-day," said Aubrey. "But then perhaps you could arrive in Wiltshire on the 8 o'clock train?" Aubrey blinked. "Pardon?" It would give me time to open up the house before you arrive. No one's there at present. We'd have total privacy. And you're welcome to stay the night." Lindsey looked very pleased with his plan, as he waited for Aubrey's input. Aubrey struggled to wrap his mind around it. "Forgive me," he choked out. "But do I understand? You're inviting me up to your house?" "I believe I am, yes," said Lindsey with a cheeky grin. Aubrey couldn't help it. He gawked, goggled even, at Lindsey's devil-may-care assessment of their predicament. "Wouldn't it attract suspicion?" "I don't see how," said Lindsey. "What could be more natural than for me to discuss business with a clerk from my mill? And if I choose to do so in my own home rather than the office, why, then these are clearly urgent matters indeed, requiring utmost secrecy. It would be terribly rude and suspicious for anyone to inquire further. Do you accept?" A rational and right-thinking man would take the time to weigh the risks and rewards of the proposal. "God, yes," Aubrey replied in a rushed exhale.
That was the 6th chapter of my gay Victorian romance, Mr. Warren's Profession, narrated by Gary Furlong. If you'd like to hear the spicy version of this chapter, you can listen to the unabridged edition wherever you find your favorite audiobooks. We'll be back next week with more Right Here, Right Queer. And as always, thank you for listening.